Amelia Hehart set off to fly around the world and was never seen again, unless a lost photograph proves otherwise. A logger in Arizona claims he was taken aboard a UFO and returned days later, and an Australian man disappeared for 20 years, only to reappear with no memory of his past life. These are more disturbing cases of people who vanished and returned from another reality. Amelia Earhart's disappearance is one of the most famous unsolved mysteries of all time. In 1937, she set off on a mission to become the first woman to fly around the world. But on July 2nd, her plane vanished somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. The last radio transmission from her reported she was running low on fuel near Howland Island, and then nothing. The massive search that followed turned up nothing, and Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan were declared lost at sea. That's the official story, but over the years, people have reported strange sightings and theories that suggest she might not have died in a crash. Some claim she was captured by the Japanese and held as a prisoner of war. Others believe she assumed a new identity and lived out her days in secrecy. Some claim to have actually spotted her with their own eyes. And in 2017, a supposed long-lost photograph surfaced from US military archives and was shared online. Some said there was a woman looking a lot like Earhart and a man who could be Noonan on a dock in the Marshall Islands. In Sydney, Australia, 1987, Gabriel Maggie went out to run errands like any normal day. He even called his wife Pamela, saying that he'd be home for lunch, but he never showed up. Pamela called the police, and soon after, a disturbing discovery was made. Gabriel's car was found burned out on the side of the road, and there was no sign of Gabriel himself. There was a massive search, but the case quickly went cold. That is, until 2 weeks later, when police discovered someone had withdrawn money from Gabriel's account over 100 miles away. But after that, the trail went dead again for 20 years. Right before Gabriel was about to be declared legally dead, one final search by a determined constable led to a shocking discovery. A man in Mackay had recently undergone surgery. His name was Ron Saunders, but hospital records showed that he also went by Gabriel Maggie. When authorities contacted him, he told them that he had barely remembered the last 2 decades. He'd been living on the streets, doing odd jobs with only fragments of memory from his past life. Doctors suspected that he'd suffered severe head trauma in the accident that burned out his car, leading to a rare case of amnesia. But something didn't quite add up. If he still knew his name, why hadn't he tried to find his family? Why not contact the police? Well, whatever the answer, the family was reunited in the end. What would you do if you realized your work could be used for something catastrophic? In the case of Italian physicist Giuseppe Majerana, he might have chosen to vanish. In 1938, Majerana, a brilliant scientist working on cutting-edge atomic research, boarded a ship from Palermo to Naples, but when the ship arrived, he was nowhere to be found. Witnesses confirmed that he'd gotten on the boat, but no one saw him get off. There were no reports of foul play either, and the weather had been calm. For years, people wondered if he'd been kidnapped, killed, fled into hiding. It wasn't until 2011 that a new clue finally came about. A photograph taken in Argentina in the 50s of a man who looked exactly like Majerana. Facial recognition experts found 10 points of similarity, meaning it was very likely him, but he barely looked like he'd aged. The leading theory is that Majerana, realizing his work on neutrinos could be used for nuclear weapons, deliberately disappeared. Some believe he may have even worked on early atomic research before realizing the implications and choosing to disappear and start over. But to this day, we still can't say for sure. On May 25th, 1985, police in Aurora, Colorado were called to a shopping mall about a woman in distress. She had no ID, no memory of who she was, and was carrying only an empty notepad and a car key. She was taken to a hospital where she spent 4 months trying to piece together her past, even reaching out to local news outlets for help, but nothing turned up. With no answers, she decided to start fresh. She changed her name to Jane D and moved to Alaska, where she built a whole new life, marrying, having 2 sets of twins, and settling down. 12 years passed, and that's when a co-worker of hers happened to see a news broadcast from Seattle about a missing woman named Jodie Roberts. The photo was unmistakable. Jane D was Jodie Roberts. an investigative journalist who had disappeared from Washington State in 1985. But what happened? How had she completely forgotten who she was? Long-term amnesia this severe is usually caused by extreme trauma or an epileptic event. Roberts had no history of epilepsy, and before vanishing, she'd emptied her bank account and taken her cats to a shelter. It looked like she'd planned to disappear, but to this day, the truth's never come out. She still goes by Jane D and is intensely private a person, not interested in speaking to the press. She has no social media. Does make you wonder though, if something happened, something to do with her journalism job that made her feel the need to get away. A man named Russ Kellett from North Yorkshire, England, came out with some pretty wild claims a few years back, and when various news sites told his story online, some people just memed the hell out of him, others were absolutely giddy. The story is pretty insane, but it is also pretty entertaining, and I'll just say, I'd love it to be real. So Kellett says that he's been taken by aliens at least 60 times. That's 60. Starting when he was just a boy. He describes waking up in a strange tunnel-like space, then finding himself on an operating table surrounded by towering Dracula-like beings who pumped a mysterious liquid into his body, supposedly turning him into a super soldier. For over 30 years, Kellett insists he's been part of an alien military force fighting against a race known as the Dragos, massive reptilian creatures with dragon-like heads. He says time moves differently in this war, with 4 hours on Earth equaling 4 years on distant planets, and that he's been battling not just in space, but here on Earth too, in places like the UK, other parts of Europe and South America. He even claims to have been transported through time, using a strange glass sphere inside a room with a chessboard patterned floor, sent to fight in conflicts across the universe. I will just leave it at that. From a now deleted Reddit user comes an odd encounter at a gas station. Back in 2016, I was driving home late at night after visiting a friend. It was a route I knew well, just a long stretch of highway with barely any traffic at that hour. About halfway home, I noticed a gas station up ahead. The thing is, I didn't remember ever seeing one there before. It didn't look new either, it looked old, like straight out of the 80s. Flickering neon lights, a beat up old truck parked out front. It even had an old school gas pump. Well, I needed gas anyway, so I pulled in. Plus, there was just no way I wasn't checking this place out. The moment I stepped out of my car, everything felt off. Inside, there was an old man behind the counter staring at a tiny TV. I asked if they took cards, but he just shook his head. Cash only. I didn't have cash, so I turned around to leave. As soon as I made it back to my car, it struck me just how weird this situation was. An old gas station that I'd never seen before along a stretch of road I'd driven down plenty of times that apparently only took cash. I shuddered a little and then drove home and tried not to think about the experience before writing it down today. Honestly, I still don't know where I stopped that night or maybe even when. In 1975, Travis Walton and his logging crew were driving home after a long day working in the Apache Site-Greaves National Forest when they spotted something very bizarre. A glowing red light hovering over the trees. As they got closer, they saw what looked like a metallic craft suspended in midair. Most people would hit the gas and get out of there, but Walton had other ideas. Ignoring his crew's warnings, he got out of the truck and walked toward it. And that's when a beam of light shot down from the craft, knocking him off his feet, lifting him into the air. That was enough for the rest of the crew. They panicked and sped off. Guilt quickly set in though, and they decided to turn back. But when they returned a few minutes later, Walton was gone. A massive search followed, but no sign of Walton turned up for 5 days. Suddenly though, he reappeared. Confused and disoriented, he ended up telling everyone eventually that he'd been taken aboard a UFO, where he encountered strange beings that seemed to be experimenting on him. He claimed he managed to fight them off and escape deeper into the ship before waking up on the side of the road with no idea how much time had passed. The case became one of the most well-documented alien abduction stories in history, probably, especially since Walton and his crew all passed multiple polygraph tests. This next case, often referred to as the friendship case, might not fit the typical missing person story, but it's got a weird, unsettling angle that connects to the idea of people vanishing, at least temporarily, and coming back with some pretty wild stories. It's not going to go where you think it's going to go. So during a stretch of time between the 1950s and 60s, a group of people in Italy claimed that they were regularly in contact with extraterrestrial beings. They were supposedly peaceful, highly advanced, and deeply invested in guiding humanity toward a better future. According to those involved, the aliens would take them to hidden bases on Earth, sharing advanced knowledge about science and spirituality, and the importance of unity. Some claim to have spent significant time with these beings, and as if this whole thing wasn't strange enough, some believe that in the course of these interactions, a few of the humans may have gotten a little too close to their extraterrestrial friends, possibly leading to the birth of alien-human hybrids. Now, obviously, this is a pretty nutty case, no pun intended, but if this story is to be believed, we've got a situation where ordinary people vanished, at least for short periods, and were taken to who knows where. Apparently, though, they came back changed. This next story comes from another now deleted Reddit user and goes as follows. In 2019, I went on a solo hiking trip in Washington. It was a well-traveled trail, nothing dangerous. I planned to camp overnight and head back the next morning. Around 1 p.m., I set up camp in a clearing, and that's when things got weird. I noticed that the forest was silent. There were no birds to be heard, no wind, just this heavy stillness. The sky had also changed. It wasn't dark, but the light had this washed out grayish tint. I was uneasy at this point, but decided it just wasn't enough to get too freaked out about. Maybe a storm was coming. Well, then about an hour later, I heard the voices, muffled like a bad recording of human speech. I stuck my head out of my tent expecting to see someone, but the clearing was empty. Now, I must have fallen asleep soon after this because I don't remember much after that. But when I woke up, the clearing looked different. The trees seemed taller, the air was heavy. At this point, I was just freaked out and decided it was time to head home. Thing is, the trail was missing. At least I couldn't find it. I walked for hours in the direction I'd come, but I never seemed to get anywhere. It was actually getting dark now. Finally, I made it out though and reached my car. I checked the time, and that's when I lost it. Less than 2 hours had passed. This was impossible. I could have sworn I was out there for 5 hours. Well, I haven't gone down that trail since, and I never will again. In August of 1976, 4 friends set out for a camping trip in the Allagash Wilderness in Maine, hoping for some peaceful time away. But things took a strange turn when they spotted a bright light in the sky on their second night, which then quickly disappeared. 2 nights later, the same light appeared again, only this time it was much more intense. In fact, they described it looking almost like the sun. As they watched, it followed them along the water. One of the men, Charlie, tried to signal SOS using his flashlight, and that's when the light shot a beam toward him. When they returned to camp, everything felt off. The fire they'd left burning was out, and they were completely drained as if hours had passed. Days went by without any other strange sightings, but when the men got home, they began having these unsettling dreams, all of them similar and terrifying. It wasn't until 1988 that they finally sought help from UFO researcher Ray Fowler and decided to undergo hypnosis. Under hypnosis, they all recalled being abducted by aliens, terrifying creatures who performed medical exams on them and even took their skin and bodily fluids. What was most chilling was that each of their stories matched almost perfectly, and they even passed polygraph tests.
Now, this first case is very, very strange. In 1880, a farmer named David Lang reportedly vanished into thin air while walking across a field on his property near Gallatin, Tennessee. There were multiple witnesses, including his wife, his 2 children, and 2 visitors arriving in a horse-drawn buggy. They said Lang was mid-step when he literally just disappeared. There was no flash of light, he hadn't fallen or gone behind a tree, he was there 1 second, and then he wasn't. The group ran to where he'd been standing, expecting to find a sinkhole or some kind of trap in the ground, but the earth was solid. They searched the area for days. Neighbors joined in, but no sign of Lang was ever found. The only thing that changed was the grass where he had vanished. It turned sort of like it decayed. It turned yellow and brittle, and for years afterward, nothing would grow there. Then, months later, Lang returned. Sort of. His daughter was playing in a field looking for four-leafed clovers, and that's when she heard it. A voice that sounded a lot like her father, calling for help. It was faint, like it was coming from underground or from behind a wall. It happened more than once, but each time they checked, there was still nothing. Eventually, even the voice stopped. The story was pretty well known at the time. It showed up in the newspaper, and the names, place, and details were consistent with public records. Was it fabricated? Maybe, but everyone there that day remained adamant about what they saw. In 2006, Carol Chase McKelney was driving through Riverside County, California, on her way home from a dog show. As she passed through her old hometown of Riverside, she figured she'd take a quick detour to see the neighborhood she grew up in. It had been years since she visited, and she was curious to see how much it had changed. Except, it wasn't her town. The street names were right, the general layout looked familiar, but her childhood home was completely gone, and so were all of the houses around it. The neighborhood had totally changed, like it had been wiped out and replaced with strange, unfamiliar buildings. She went to look for her grandmother's house. Gone too. Her old school was nowhere to be found. Even the cemetery where several family members were buried didn't look the same. The graves were different, and the whole place just felt wrong, like a dream version of her hometown. Completely shook, she got out of there, and it wasn't until years later that she felt the courage to come back. But this time, everything was normal. Her grandmother's house was there, her childhood home too, the school, everything was just like it always had been. So, what happened? Carol was completely sober, not tired, not on medication. She knew what she saw and what she didn't see. She swore up and down that for a few strange hours, she stepped into some alternate version of her hometown, a place almost like hers, but not quite. In 1978, 23-year-old Stephen Kubaki was a college student studying German at Hope College in Michigan. One February afternoon, he went cross-country skiing near Lake Michigan and never came back. The next day, his skis and backpack were found near the edge of the frozen lake. There were footprints leading out onto the ice, and then nothing. Search and rescue teams looked for weeks, but no trace of him was ever found. Everyone assumed the same thing, that he had fallen through the ice and died. Except, 15 months later, he showed up. Stephen woke up on a grassy hill in a field in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, over 700 miles away from where he disappeared. He was wearing clothes he didn't recognize, with a satchel full of maps he didn't remember collecting. He had a t-shirt from a marathon in Wisconsin, which he didn't recall running, and his last memory was being on the ice. He walked to his aunt's house nearby, and from there eventually reconnected with his parents. Nobody had seen or heard from him in a year and 3 months, but all things considered, he looked healthy. He was just confused like everybody else. When asked what happened, Stephen said he had no idea. He didn't remember anything. It was like someone had hit a reset button on his brain. To this day, he still doesn't talk much about it, and after the incident, he went back to school, earned a degree, and eventually became a clinical psychologist, which is kind of wild considering he's got one of the strangest unsolved disappearance stories on record. But I guess also maybe that makes him the perfect person for the job, you know? In March of 2017, Bruno Borges, a 24-year-old psychology student from Brazil, vanished without a trace. His family had last seen him at their home in Rio Branco, and when they realized he hadn't taken his phone, wallet, or anything useful for a getaway, they went into his locked bedroom. And that is when things got really strange. The entire room had been turned into some kind of cryptic research lab. The furniture was gone, replaced with a giant statue of a 16th century philosopher who believed in infinite worlds and extraterrestrials. There were also pages and pages of handwritten text covering the walls, floor to ceiling. Over 14 books worth written in a bizarre code nobody could read. Bruno's family had no idea any of this was going on. He'd apparently been working on it in secret for months. When news about his disappearance came out, internet sleuths obsessed over his case. His encrypted writings were eventually partially decoded. They talked about personal evolution, contact with higher beings, and preparing humanity for something bigger. But still, no one knew where he went. But after 5 months of silence, Bruno showed up back home. barefoot. He wouldn't say much about where he'd been, only that he'd been working on his ideas. His family and police said he was in good health, mentally stable, and not on any substances. He didn't really give interviews, and most of the public still doesn't know why he left or what exactly he was trying to do. In 1935, British Royal Air Force officer Victor Goddard was flying a biplane over an abandoned airfield near Edinburgh, Scotland. I think that's how you say it, and everyone in the comments is gonna be like, that's not how you say it. Well, I'm not Scottish, so I don't know what you want me to do. The place was falling apart, overgrown with weeds, buildings crumbling, not a soul in sight. A few days later, he flew the same route again, but this time, something was off. As he approached the airfield, a sudden storm hit. Thick, swirling clouds, heavy rain, turbulence. Then, just as fast, the sky cleared. Everything looked brighter. Unnaturally so. The airfield below was no longer abandoned. The buildings were intact, freshly painted. Planes were on the ground, yellow ones, which wasn't the standard RAF color at the time, and mechanics in blue overalls were moving around, working on them. None of this made sense in 1935. The colors, the uniforms, the specific model of aircraft he saw, they weren't part of the Air Force yet. When he told people what he'd seen, they thought he was just confused or mistaken. But a few years later, during World War II, that same airfield was brought back to life. It was restored, the planes were painted yellow, and the mechanics wore blue coveralls, just like Goddard had described. It was as if he had seen the future. No one could explain it then, and no one really can now, and Goddard wasn't some nut. He was an air marshal. Dead serious, no nonsense, and he swore up and down till his death that this actually happened. In 2008, a woman named Lena Garcia from Spain woke up and immediately felt something was off. At first, it was little things. Her bed sheets were different, her pajamas weren't the ones she remembered putting on the night before. Confused, she chalked it up to grogginess and just got ready for work. But when she got to the office, the weirdness escalated. She'd been working at the same place for 20 years, but when she arrived, she realized she didn't work in the same department anymore. She was listed under a completely different role, one she swore she'd never been assigned. Her boss, her coworkers, the whole structure was different, but it got worse. She reached out to her ex-boyfriend, who she'd broken up with months earlier, only to find out that they'd never broken up at all. According to him, they were still together. The man she had been dating, who she'd just seen a few days ago, was nowhere to be found. His number didn't even work. It was like he never existed. Lorena genuinely believed she'd woken up in a different version of reality, one nearly identical to her own, but with very key differences. She went to doctors, psychologists, everyone she could think of trying to explain what happened, but no one had an answer. She was healthy, her memory was sharp, yet her life didn't match her memories. And to this day, Lorena insists that she's from somewhere else, that she somehow crossed into a parallel dimension and has been stuck here ever since. In May of 1972, 4 girls from Southern Utah University were driving home after a rodeo when they took a shortcut through Gadianton Canyon, near the Utah-Nevada border. Around 10 p.m., the road beneath them changed from black asphalt to smooth white cement. The desert landscape gave way to unfamiliar grain fields and towering pines, not at all what they expected in southern Utah. Thinking they were lost, they turned around. Then they spotted a small roadside tavern and pulled over to ask for directions. Before anyone could get out, one of the girls screamed. Heading towards them were 4 strange egg-shaped vehicles with tricycle-style wheels and glowing lights. The girls, completely panicked, jumped back in the car and tore off through the canyon. As suddenly as it started, the strange scenery disappeared and the road returned to normal. They eventually crashed into a creek, damaging her car and flattening 3 tires. At dawn, they hiked to the highway and flagged down a trooper named Victoria Lindquist, who was shocked and confused to find that their tire tracks ended abruptly 600 feet into the desert. And despite being found miles from the road, no one could explain how they got there. One hubcap was also missing, which was never found. Back in the 1800s, there was a man named William Cantello, an eccentric British inventor obsessed with creating a rapid-fire automatic weapon. After years of work, he told his family he was heading to the market to sell his invention, and he never came back home. Roughly 20 years later, an American inventor named Hiram Maxim rose to fame with, you guessed it, a rapid-fire automatic firearm. Maxim also looked strikingly similar to Cantello, so much so that Cantello's own children were convinced he was their father. The resemblance became such a nuisance that Maxim addressed it in his autobiography, claiming someone had been impersonating him. Now, that may have been the case. It was just a coincidence that he not only looked just like another man, but also took up the same vocation. But some believe Cantello faked his disappearance and took on a new identity, or that Cantello and Maxim were the same person from two different realities, and at some point they switched places, leaving both men stuck in the wrong timeline. This has to be one of the strangest missing persons cases that I have ever heard. In 1763, in a quiet English town of Shepton Mallet, a man named Owen Parfett vanished without a trace. He was old, frail, and paralyzed. He couldn't walk, couldn't dress himself, he barely moved. Locals say he was a former sailor with a shady past, but by the time this story takes place, he was basically bedridden. Well, one warm evening, Owen was sitting outside his sister's cottage, propped in a chair, enjoying the breeze. His sister and a neighbor helped him outside, then they went inside for a bit. They claimed they were gone maybe 15 minutes, and when they came back, the chair was there, still facing the road, but Owen was gone. Now, this wasn't a busy area. It wasn't like someone could sneak up, lift a full-grown man who couldn't walk, and then vanish without making a sound, but it seemed like that's exactly what happened. People searched the fields, wells, nearby roads. Nothing. Days passed, then weeks. Rumors spread. Some started to wonder if he'd just been faking the paralysis for years before finally deciding to... what? Wander off into the wilderness alone? I don't know. It's not a good option. The theories? I don't know. I've got no new ones. In 1961, a girl named Joe Duperalt went on what was supposed to be a dream family vacation, a week-long cruise on a rented sailboat in the Bahamas. But just a few days in, everything went horribly wrong. Joe woke up one night to the sound of footsteps and her brother screaming. When she went topside, she found the deck covered in blood. Her mother and brother were dead. The captain, Julian Harvey, was the only adult left standing, and when he saw her, he didn't say a word, he just stared. She went back below deck, terrified. Minutes later, water started flooding in. The boat was sinking. She escaped onto a small floaty and drifted alone for nearly 4 days under the scorching sun. Dehydrated, sunburned, and half-conscious, she was eventually rescued by a Greek freighter. The fact that she survived at all was almost a miracle. Captain Harvey was rescued days earlier in a lifeboat and told authorities that the boat sank in a freak accident. He said that everyone else was lost at sea, but when he found out Joe survived, he took his own life immediately. She never saw him kill her family, but everyone believes that that is exactly what happened, probably for insurance money. Still, there are holes in the story, and what Joe saw that night, she never fully talked about. Some say she blocked it all out, others think something even darker went down. Till this day, though, the case has never really been solved. There is a book about this, if you're interested. I think it's called like Orphan Lost at Sea or something like that. And also, if you're a fan of the podcast MFM, if you know, you know, in one of their recap episodes that they're doing right now, the rewinds, they just did this one like a few weeks ago, so go listen to that, read the book. The story's crazy, you guys, that's just crazy. This little girl's just lost at sea, then she's found, and everything was okay for her. And that's the important part of the story.
Chris Kramers and Leanne Frun, two young women from the Netherlands, disappeared on April 1st of 2014 while hiking along the El Pianista Trail in Panama. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to the pair. The young women arrived in Panama on March 15th. For 2 weeks, they toured around the country before heading over to Boquete Chinquiri, a small island in Panama where they stayed with a host family. Witness reports claim that prior to taking off on the Pianista Trail, the girls had brunch with two young Dutchmen before making their way into the Panamanian jungle, accompanied by a local dog. When the dog returned from the woods alone later that night, locals began to worry. It was at this time that the girls' families had stopped hearing from them as well. A search party went out to look for the pair. For over a month, there was no sign of Chris nor Leanne, but then on the 14th of June, a local woman stumbled across Leanne's backpack. The girls' phones were analyzed, and it was discovered that just a few hours into their hike, both of them had dialed emergency lines 911 and 112 multiple times, but due to poor reception, none of the calls went through. There were also many photos found on the girls' phones, one of which depicted what appeared to be a wound on the back of Leanne's head. The discovery of the backpack and the phones prompted a wider search of the area. Eventually, the search party found items of the girls' clothing and then bones, some with skin still attached and some bleached completely. DNA revealed that those bones did in fact belong to Chris and Leanne, but no one could figure out why or how the bodies had been dismembered or where the remaining body parts were. The tragic disappearances and deaths of Chris Kramers and Leanne Frun remain an unsolved and incredibly perplexing mystery.
In 1990, a small group of fishermen went missing off the coast of South Carolina. It seemed as if they'd simply drowned, but then the families of the men began receiving mysterious phone calls. It was April 12th when the small ship, the Casey Nicole, took off from McIntosh County Pier in Georgia with 4 men on board. Billy Joe Neesmith was the captain. Along with him was his brother Nathan, his nephew Keith Wilkes, and their friend Franklin Brantley. But around 3 in the morning, Nathan got up to find that there was something very wrong with the boat. It wasn't smoothly gliding over the water, it was riding into it. The small crew realized that their boat was taking on water. They ended up needing to abandon ship, climbing into a raft. Nathan, however, got onto a small box, attempting to sail off to find help. Nathan was found alive 5 days later, but the other men were nowhere to be found. Just over a month after their disappearance, though, the families and owner of the Casey Nicole began receiving strange calls from a man speaking Spanish. He would simply repeat their names and phone numbers over and over, but on the last call, the mysterious man said one sentence in English: "I'm bringing them home." And the connection was broken, and there have been no calls since.
On October 21st of 1978, an experienced pilot by the name of Frederick Valentic set out on a solo flight from Moorabbin, Victoria, Australia to the nearby King Island. In total, the flight should have taken an hour tops, but it seems as though it may have cost Frederick the rest of his life. It was a clear day, no clouds and little wind, so the flight to the island should have been smooth, quick, and easy, which it was at first. You see, partway through the journey, Valentic radioed into air traffic control to inform them that an unidentified aircraft had begun following him. Radio traffic control responded saying that there were no other aircrafts in the area. This is when Valentic started to become uneasy. He told air traffic control that whatever was following him was also messing with him too, hovering above and moving around his plane. A while later, he radioed in again and spoke his last known words, which were something along the lines of, "It's on top of me again, and it's not an aircraft." After that, his radio went silent for about 17 seconds before a horrible metallic screeching noise came through the receiver, and that was it. Frederick Valentic nor his plane were ever seen or heard from again. Of course, many people think he was abducted by a UFO, and many others believe he simply crashed into the ocean. Unfortunately, there's no way of knowing, but I think what we can all agree on is that it's quite strange that not one shred of evidence indicating what might have happened to Valentic or his aircraft has ever been found.
Ruthanne Roupert was an experienced climber and adventurer. In August of 2000, she left her home in Florida to vacation in Yosemite National Park. I don't use the word experienced lightly. She was known to have accomplished some pretty intense feats. She once climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with a frozen foot, so a trip to Yosemite would have seemed like a walk in the park for her. She planned to join a backpacking group traveling 30 miles across Yosemite. Unfortunately, though, on the morning she was to go meet up with the group, she woke up with an eye infection. She ended up heading to the clinic instead. She decided that she was still going to make the best of her trip though. She rented a tent cabin and went shopping for supplies, but after this, she completely vanished. The only clue left behind were her supplies, later found sitting in her cabin. There was no way she would have trekked out into the wilderness without them, and the search and rescue teams searched the park, but nothing turned up. It wasn't until 8 years later that Rupert's backpack was discovered in Fireplace Creek, stuck in a drainage area almost 8 miles away from Curry Village, where she'd been staying. But how did it get there? Who was responsible? The case remains a mystery to this day.
Jennifer Kess went missing in the afternoon of January 4th, 2006. Her home showed no signs of forced entry. In fact, there were no signs of anyone other than Jennifer having been there at all. It seemed as though, due to the placement of toiletries and clothing, that she had simply woken up, gotten ready for work, and then gotten into her car and left. However, she nor her car ever made it to her place of employment. Kess was unfortunately never found, but her car was, in an apartment complex a mile away from her home. Police were able to retrieve CCTV footage that had captured the image of the man who had dropped the car off. But there was one major problem. The video did not show the man's face. You see, generally with CCTV footage, video is made up of images captured every few seconds. In this case, 3 seconds. The man in the video was seen walking behind a fence, and every shot shows his face hidden behind a different fence post. There is none of him in between the posts. Because of this, the police were unable to ID who one reporter called the luckiest person of interest ever. The case of the man's identity and the whereabouts of Jennifer Kess have yet to be solved.
This next case really goes to show just how quickly and suddenly people can disappear, with no signs of distress at all. Just there one moment, gone the next. It's really unsettling. Thelma Polly Melton loved the mountains. She was a regular hiker and had spent years exploring the trails in Smoky Mountains, North Carolina. Polly was well known and loved in the local community, often volunteering at a senior home in town. In 1981, she set out on a hike with 2 friends. Given her experience, it should have been a straightforward, leisurely walk, but as they were walking, Polly sped up and went ahead of her friends. She went out of sight over a small hill. When her friends caught up moments later, expecting to see her on the other side, they were shocked to find that there was no sign of her, and there never was. Over a year later, a check in Polly's name was cashed in Alabama, but police couldn't definitively confirm it was her signature. Some believe Polly decided to run away. Her husband was ill, her mother had recently passed away, and there were rumors from her pastor that she might have been having an affair. Interestingly, the day before she disappeared, Polly asked to use the phone at the senior home where she volunteered, something she'd never done in her 4 years there.
On February 26 of 2015, a young man named Dalen Mokua informed his grandmother of his plans to hike the Mauna Lua Valley Park in Honolulu, Hawaii. He also said that he would be climbing the Haiku Stairs, or the Stairway to Heaven. His grandmother warned him against such actions, as the stairs were at the time in a state of complete disarray and therefore illegal to climb. Dalen went anyways. Throughout his day, he sent multiple photos of his journey to his family through text, showing both himself and the beautiful hiking trails. Eventually, however, the texts stopped coming. Later that night, when Dalen failed to return home, he was declared missing. His family immediately began looking through the photographs he had sent for any kind of clue as to where he might be. And then they came across the very last photo Dalen had ever sent. In the photo, there was a man just off the trail that appeared to be hiding behind a bush, a man who very well might be the reason Dalen never returned home. Unfortunately, the police are yet to identify the man, and Dalen's whereabouts, as well as what might have happened to him, remain a mystery to this day.
Tara Khaliko was 19 years old when she went missing in Valencia County, New Mexico. On September 20th, 1988, she set out for a bike ride and never came home. Her family called the police and started a massive search, but they found no sign of her. Unfortunately, there just wasn't anything to go off, and the case went cold. But then disturbing clues started to pop up. In June of 1989, a Polaroid photo was found in a Florida parking lot showing a young woman and boy bound and gagged. The photo was sent to John Walsh's show America's Most Wanted, which aired asking the public for tips. Tara's mother saw the broadcast and was shocked. The woman in the photo looked just like her daughter, but police couldn't track down the subjects or the photographer of the photo. Then 2 years later, more unsettling photos surfaced. Found at a construction site in Montecito, California, these photos showed a woman tied up who again resembled Tara. Her mother was convinced that it was her daughter, but unfortunately they still weren't able to locate who had taken these photos, and her case has never been solved.
Kathy Molton disappeared for the first time in 1971 and possibly once more in the 1980s. To this day, the whereabouts of Molton remains an unsolved and incredibly baffling mystery. Now, on the afternoon of September 24th, 1971, Kathy Molton was shopping with her father when she spotted a friend. With permission, the pair separated from Kathy's father and visited a nearby record store. They stayed there until about 5:30, which is when Kathy started walking back home. She was never seen again. Or was she? A few days after Kathy's initial disappearance, police received word that a woman matching Kathy's description had been seen in the passenger seat of a car being driven by a young man the night of her disappearance. Unfortunately, local authorities were unable to identify the man, and neither of Kathy's parents nor any of her friends could think of who it might possibly be. So of course the case went cold, but 10 years later, the police received their second lead. A local hunter in rural Maine called into the police station claiming to have found female human remains dressed in 1970s style clothing. But when the police arrived at the scene, the remains were nowhere to be found. A final search of the area took place in 2004, but unfortunately, nothing came of it, and the case went cold once more. If the hunter was in fact telling the truth, whether or not the remains belonged to Kathy, what happened to them and her remain a total mystery to this day. Did Kathy disappear twice? Who's to say?
On July 2nd of 1966, 3 young women, Ann Miller, Patricia Blau, and Renee Bruhl, visited the Indiana Dunes National Park. They were never seen again. The trio arrived at the park and were last seen on the beach, where they left their belongings before entering Lake Michigan. There was a massive week-long search involving the police, the Coast Guard, and volunteers, but no sign of the women. A number of witnesses claimed to have seen 3 women fitting their descriptions on a small boat, though. So authorities expanded their search to a 6-mile radius around the beach. Then more witnesses started to come forward, reporting that they'd seen the woman talking to an unidentified man in his early 20s operating a boat. Several theories have been proposed about their disappearance. All 3 women had connections to horse racing and were involved with guys who had criminal records. One of the women had reportedly lost a significant amount of money gambling on horses soon before they went missing, and people who knew the 3 told police they'd all been dealing with personal issues at the time. So I have to imagine if gambling debts had something to do with this, maybe they weren't killed or kidnapped, maybe they decided to disappear on their own accord. The phantom time hypothesis was introduced in 1991 by German historian and author Herbert Illig. The idea is simple but strange. About 300 years of history, specifically the years between 614 and 911 CE, were completely made up. If Illig is right, we're not living in 2025, we're actually in the 1700s, and everything from the early Middle Ages was just faked. See, Illig looked at the time period and noticed something he thought was kinda odd. There just didn't seem to be a lot there. Hardly any surviving records, barely any major cultural or technological shifts, and not much in the way of solid archaeological evidence. He didn't think that that was just a coincidence either. To him, it looked like those centuries were added later on, intentionally, and thought that the people we believe lived and ruled during that time were either exaggerated or completely fictional. According to Illig, this wasn't just a case of historians making mistakes. He believed it was a deliberate move, made by powerful people who wanted to rewrite the calendar for their own benefit. Whether or not that holds up is another story, but this theory completely flips the way that we think about the timeline of human history. Illig didn't think this fake time period just slipped in by accident. He believed there were real people behind it, starting with Holy Roman Emperor Otto III. According to the theory, Otto wanted to rule during the year 1000 CE, because it had a big religious significance to it. Being the emperor during the first millennium, it just sounds impressive, and it tied neatly into Christian ideas about divine rule and prophecy and all that. The problem, well, he wasn't born in time, so the solution, according to Illig, was to change the calendar. Otto supposedly worked with Pope Sylvester II to pull this off. Together, they allegedly pushed the timeline forward by nearly 300 years to make it seem like they were living in the year 1000 when Really, it was sometime in the 700s. Illig also roped in Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII. He was known for being deeply interested in history and was responsible for copying and preserving many older texts. Illig thought that Constantine may have helped forge or edit certain documents to help fill in the gaps in this new adjusted timeline. Basically, these three leaders worked together, at least in the theory, to reshape the flow of time itself, making history fit the narrative that they wanted the world to believe. Another one of Illig's big arguments had to do with the calendars. Before the calendar that we use today, most of Europe followed the Julian calendar. It wasn't perfect, it was off by about 11 minutes per year, which added up over time. And by the 1500s, the seasons and dates were noticeably out of sync. So Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar in 1582 to fix this. Now, the calendar change only skipped ahead 10 days to get things back on track, but if the Julian calendar had really been in use since Roman times without correction, Illig argued that the real difference should have been closer to 13 days. It's about 3 extra days unaccounted for, which in his mind matched the roughly 300 phantom years that he believed had been added. Most historians say these numbers aren't as straightforward as Illig made them out to be, but he saw this as a clue. If the math didn't add up, maybe the timeline didn't either. Illig also pointed to what's not there, specifically physical evidence. If the year 614 to 911 CE really happened, where's all the stuff from that time? He believed there was a noticeable lack of buildings, artifacts, and reliable written records from those centuries. For example, most of the castles, cathedrals, and major stone structures we associate with the Middle Ages didn't show up until after the year 900. And the ones that are claimed to be older sometimes don't quite fit stylistically with what came before or after. Illig thought that was suspicious, saying that those structures were either built later than we've been told or misdated entirely. Same goes for everyday items like pottery, tools, and coins. There's a noticeable dip in findings from that period, which Illig thought was too big to ignore. Now, most mainstream archaeologists say it's not that strange. Societies were shifting, literacy rates were low, and records just didn't always survive. But Illig saw it as a hole in the timeline, a gap that only made sense if those centuries never happened in the first place. Then there's Charlemagne, one of the most famous rulers of medieval Europe. Illig didn't just question his legacy, he straight up claimed that Charlemagne never existed. It sounds extreme, but here's how Illig looked at it. Charlemagne's story is full of larger-than-life accomplishments. He supposedly united a huge part of Europe, revived the Roman Empire in the West, pushed Christianity, and kickstarted what's known as the Carolingian Renaissance. That's a lot for one man, and the details are sometimes vague, inconsistent, or based on sources written long after his supposed death. And Illig argued Charlemagne was more of a political invention, a legendary figure created to give legitimacy to later rulers, especially the Holy Roman Emperors. It's a common move in history. Make up a heroic ancestor to strengthen your own claim to power. To Illig, the reign of Charlemagne was just too perfect, it was too clean, and too conveniently placed at the center of this supposed phantom time period. If those centuries were invented, and so was the man said to define them, in his view. Another part of Illig's argument involved strange patterns in the historical record, events that seemed to repeat across different cultures. He noticed that some of the major happenings in Byzantine, Islamic, and Western European history looked oddly similar, almost like they were copied or mirrored versions of each other. Not vague themes like wars or political struggles, Illig pointed out specific battles, rulers, and cultural developments that just seemed to line up a little too well, as if someone took one storyline and reworked it multiple times to make history feel more fleshed out than it really was. He believed these echoes were filler, recycled content used to patch together the fake centuries. Instead of inventing 300 years from scratch, the conspirators may have just borrowed pieces of real history from other time periods and repackaged them under different names and dates. That way, the fake era would still look real to anyone who was just skimming through the records. The early Middle Ages are often called the Dark Ages. and Illig took that term really literally. He believed that the lack of written records wasn't due to cultural decline, it was because those years simply didn't exist. He pointed to how few documents survived from 614 to 911 AD compared to other eras, and sure, some writing exists, but a lot of it was copied later or is based on oral traditions passed down and written long after the fact. There's very little that comes directly from that period. For Illig, that was a major red flag. In his view, this wasn't a time when people stopped writing, it was a time that was invented, and that the documents were either retroactively created to make it look real or just never needed because nobody lived through it in the first place. Most historians disagree, saying that war, disease, illiteracy, and collapsing governments made it just harder to preserve knowledge back then. Now for some pushback. One idea is that the weird gaps and inconsistencies come from simple human error. Back in the day, most records were copied by hand. Scribes made mistakes, misread dates, or changed things to suit local politics or religion. Over time, those little errors could have snowballed into bigger timeline problems. Others say that natural disasters might have caused the slowdown, huge volcanic eruptions, plagues, that could have thrown entire societies off track for long periods of time. It would explain why so many things seemed to kind of pause during the early Middle Ages. Things just sucked, and people were busy trying to survive, not building cathedrals or writing books. There's also the possibility that the records did exist but were lost, burned in wars, which there were a lot of, or just rotted away with time. In that case, the holes in history are real, but they don't mean the years themselves were fake. So while Illig's theory pretty wild, it does at least point out some genuine gaps in our understanding, gaps that could have explanations a bit less dramatic than time fraud though. The academic world didn't exactly embrace Illig's theory. Historians, archaeologists, and scientists from all over have looked at his claims and they've pushed back hard. One of the biggest rebuttals comes from astronomy too. We have records of solar eclipses and comets and other sky events going back thousands of years. Those records match up with modern calculations. If a solar eclipse was reported in the year 755 and we can confirm that one did happen, it's a strong sign that the timeline is correct. Things like Halley's Comet have been tracked across centuries, and those sightings line up with the current calendar, not one that's 300 years off. Then there's dendrochronology, or tree ring dating. Scientists use tree growth patterns to track years with really incredible accuracy. Those rings also confirm the existing timeline with no missing centuries. Most experts agree Illig was misreading the data. Still, they don't dismiss what he brings up altogether. It's flawed, but it is interesting. So, if historians have shut it down, why do people still believe in the phantom time hypothesis? Part of it comes down, well, a lot of it comes down to mistrust. A lot of people don't fully trust governments, religious institutions, or experts like historians in general. The idea that those groups could have worked together to rewrite history plays right into that suspicion. It's not just about the dates, it's about control, about who gets to decide what's true and what isn't. There's also a kind of thrill in imagining that we've been living in a lie, that everything we know about the past is off by centuries. It taps into that same appeal as hidden civilizations and long-lost ancient knowledge. People love a good cover-up story, and let's face it, history is full of holes. We don't have all the answers. So when someone like Illig shows up with this bold, strange idea, it does grab people's attention, whether that's right or not.
Coming in at number 10 is the Dolan twins. The Dolan twins. When I was 16, my friend Megan and I were obsessed with them. Now, Ethan and Grayson Dolan, collectively known as the Dolan twins, rose to prominence in May 2013 on Vine. They then moved over to YouTube and were a massive success. And not to flex, but Grayson followed me on Twitter and liked 4 of my tweets, so no big deal. They had been on social media from such a young age, and they were starting to get worn out. Unfortunately, their father Sean was diagnosed with cancer and passed away on January 19th, 2019. Now, this absolutely devastated them, and their lives were understandably never the same. On October 8th, 2019, they uploaded a 60-minute video titled "It's Time to Move On" their YouTube channel. They explained the stress of their father's death and that they intend to change the content of their channel and to make a more flexible schedule. schedule. Then on January 14th, 2021, they uploaded a podcast titled We're Moving On from YouTube onto their podcast channel Deeper with the Dolan Twins. After this, they seemed to just disappear from the internet. They stopped posting on all social media, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat, and no one really knows how they're doing. Earlier this year, a fan saw them on the subway in NYC and snapped a photo. It was posted on Twitter and blew up due to all the support for them. Other than that, it's not clear what they're doing with their lives, and whatever it is, I hope they're having a happy private life, and if they're somehow watching this, Ethan, Grayson, I love you both so much. Number 9. Lil Tay. Lil Tay, real name Claire Hope, is a Canadian YouTuber, rapper, and internet personality who first shot to fame in 2018 when she was just 9 years old. The self-proclaimed youngest flexer of the century debuted her first single in early 2018. She quickly became known for her foul mouth while bragging about her wealth, flashing wads of cash, and flexing in sports cars. Now, Tay's background has always been a subject of debate among fans, leading many to speculate that her personality was a persona drummed up and manipulated by internet fame-hungry parents. Through years of internet fan sleuthing and interviews, it's now known that Tay's mother is Angela Tien, who is a suburban realtor from Vancouver, Canada. Angela used her career connections to film videos with Tay in the empty luxury homes that she was otherwise supposed to be selling. The expensive sports cars seen in the videos also weren't theirs. They allegedly belonged to Angela's boss and were used without permission. When this was found out, Angela was then fired. Now, there are many talks about Lil Tay being exploited by her mother, and there was a custody battle between both of her parents. Lil Tay then just disappeared, which was probably for the best if we're being honest. Number 8. Timmy Thick. Timmy Thick began posting on Instagram in 2016 as Timmy the Barbie. He amassed a following by posting raunchy photos, wearing women's clothes, and posing in feminine positions. Now, this content resulted in the account being banned several times, but let me tell you, he was a slay. Now, we don't know too much about him, but he was rumored to be a boy in his teens, with some believing he was 18 years old. In 2018, his Instagram account had over 35,000 followers, and his Twitter had over 38,000 followers. Then, on March 17th, 2018, the Timmy Thick Twitter account tweeted, "Good evening, Timmy Thick was a 24-month sociological study conducted by Harvard University. We are now complete with our study. Thank you for your time." Now, the tweet gained over 30,000 retweets and 80,000 likes. Now, Timmy has not tweeted since, and his Instagram account appears to have been deleted. This left many users of the platform wondering if the Timmy Thick account was really the result of a Harvard study or that of an elaborate hoax. Harvard professor of sociology Jason Beckfield said there is no such Harvard study in response to an inquiry about Timmy, so who knows the truth. Timmy Thick, you are gone, but you will never be forgotten. Number 7. Gabby Petito. In August 2021, Gabby Petito had her life ended by her fiance, Brian Laundrie, while they were traveling together on a van life journey across the United States. The trip was planned to last 4 months and began on July 2nd, 2021, but Gabby disappeared in late August. Now, she was documenting the whole experience, and one report mentioned how Gabby traveled in a van because she was trying to gain more followers. Her account has since exploded in popularity, but before her death, she only had a few hundred Instagram followers. Now, after Gabby's disappearance, Brian raised suspicion when he drove the van from Wyoming back to his parents' Florida home and refused to discuss her whereabouts. He was deemed a person of interest in the case, and an arrest warrant was issued on charges of him making withdrawals using her debit card. He then left his home on September 13th and was reported missing 4 days later. On September 19th, Gabby's remains were found in Wyoming's Bridgerton's National Forest. An autopsy found that she died by manual strangulation. After months of speculation around Brian's whereabouts and an extended search of the area of his home, his skeletal remains were discovered in a Florida park on October 20th. It was confirmed by an autopsy on November 23rd that Brian had died from self-inflicted gunshot wounds to the head, and the FBI later announced that he had admitted to ending Gabby's life in his notebook, which was found near his remains. Number 6. Andrew Dawson. TikToker Andrew Dawson posted a video of a giant in May 2022 standing atop a mountain in Canada. He zooms into the mountain and there you can see a large person. Now, Andrew calls it a giant, and I agree with him because there's no way that's a human. Now, after his post, he reported having interactions with the CIA and Canadian CSIS, as well as claims that he was being stalked after the post. He also uploaded a post entitled "I'm Scared," where he informed viewers that they might not see him post ever again after it, but everything was true. He then posted another TikTok of what appears to be military vehicles on top of the mountain where he saw the giant. Since that post, Andrew has not been seen on TikTok or any other form of social media, sparking plenty of theories about his whereabouts. His videos have gained millions of views, but suddenly the comments were turned off. And with this being TikTok, things have gotten pretty wacky, but it seems that the full story may never be told. Andrew's obituary was actually posted, indicating he passed away, but did he fake his own death? Was it a setup? It seems like we'll never know. Number 5. Spy Kitten TV. Spy Kitten TV was also known as Dasha once upon a time. Her channel is still on YouTube, showing 270k subscribers and 39 videos, but her last video was uploaded over 4 years ago. This channel was created in September 2015 and mainly dealt with conspiracy theories about the Illuminati and famous names that she believed were involved. There's no confirmation about what caused her to disappear from the platform, although there are several theories from similar conspiracy theorists about the potential cause of her disappearance, which was the Illuminati got rid of her for exposing them. So what is the truth? I don't think we'll ever find out. Number 4. Marina Joyce. Marina Joyce is a beauty and fashion YouTuber who was allegedly missing for 10 days in 2019, almost 3 years after her fans raised an alarm to London police over bizarre behavior in her YouTube videos. In 2016, tweets with the hashtag #SaveMarinaJoyce speculated that Joyce was being held captive. However, it was later confirmed that she was completely fine, and it wasn't until 2019 when she actually disappeared. Marina went missing for 10 days in August 2019, but within hours of the incident being reported to the police, her boyfriend tweeted, "Everything is being dealt with in a professional manner. Please don't worry about her as she is safe and well. You have my word for that." Now she managed to leverage her disappearance as a great growth opportunity, and her channel now has 2 million subscribers and 112 million views. Number 3. Low Anthony. Anthony Quintal, better known as Low Anthony, is an American former YouTuber and social media star. He started making YouTube videos at age 10 and blew up on social media. He was a success, but then in 2020, he removed most of his past videos, posted a 41-minute long video titled "Jesus Delivers Surviving Sexuality," in which he renounced his earlier videos and homosexuality, stating that he had been trying to find God's love by pursuing homosexual relationships, which he described as sexual immortality. He then added that he would be opting for a life of Christian celibacy instead. Now the video received largely negative reactions from fans and fellow YouTube stars as they speculated he had been a victim of conversion therapy. He denied attending conversion therapy in a subsequent video titled "Conversion Therapy and God's Truth," stating that he was abandoning consuming lusts, both homosexual and heterosexual alike. Since then he has disappeared from the internet, but even if he does come back, he will never be the same Low Anthony we once loved. Number 2. Gabby Hanna. Gabby Hanna rose to prominence on the video platforms Vine and YouTube before releasing her debut single Out Loud in 2017. Now if you don't know Gabby from her own social media page, you might know her through association with David Dobrik and Liza Koshy, as she was a part of the famous Vlog Squad. Gabby has had many controversies, and she has spoken out about her mental health struggles as she is bipolar. Now it seemed like she was going through a manic episode and posting it on TikTok for the entire world to see in August 2022. She posted dozens of concerning clips to her TikTok account one day and posted upward to 50 TikToks a day for at least 3 days straight. Many of the videos were about religion and seemed out of character for her, and she was incoherent. She eventually came out of that episode and said it was due to her being bipolar. Now, Gabby hasn't posted anything on her social media pages since January 2023, and no one seems to have heard from her since. And coming in at number 1 is Onision. James Jackson is a creator who's known online as Onision. His primary YouTube channel featured sketches and satirical clips. Videos posted on his other channels focus on personal stories covering controversial topics, as well as a discussion with his viewers. His online content has attracted controversy and criticism from online media outlets and viewers alike, as well as many allegations of misconduct in his private life. He's been accused of taking advantage of women and body shaming in his videos. In 2019, a video featuring his girlfriend resurfaced online. In it, he's heard telling her, "You know this video is never going to be online, right? No one will ever know know how much I mistreat you," before throwing candy corn at her and laughing as his girlfriend cried. On February 9th, 2023, it was reported that a lawsuit was being filed against him for using his popular YouTube channels to recruit, solicit, and groom the young. YouTube and its parent company Google also named as co-defendants for continuing to monetize his channels. Then on March 2nd, 2023, a second suit was filed against him by a woman named Sarah. It appears that after all this, he has left the internet, and I say good riddance.